from the All Indiana Podcast Network.
It's time for real conversation about the real issues that affect our communities.
Poverty, education, equality, and more.
This is Real Talk.
Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Welcome to Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast Network. I'm Reverend Charles Harrison, and on this episode, we're going to talk about the Indianapolis 10-Point Coalition. And is the Indianapolis 10-Point Coalition a real viable option to help reduce the level of urban youth violence and violence in general in Indianapolis? And is there hope for communities of color that are struggling with reducing violence and have been for decades in this country? Is there really hope that violence can be reduced in those hotspot areas that we're seeing, not just in Indianapolis, but all across the country? Welcome to Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast Network, and I am Reverend Charles Harrison, your host today on Real Talk. And today, I want to try to deal with a subject that for some communities, it is a taboo to even talk about it. I call it urban violence. Some call it black-on-black violence. And certainly it is a major epidemic in the black community. Some see it as a health epidemic. Others see it as a spiritual epidemic. But the ultimate result is that homicide is the leading cause of death for black males in America, sadly, between the ages of 1 year old and 44 years old. That number has dramatically increased. And we're seeing now in 2023 the kind of homicide numbers that we were seeing in the 1980s and 1990s. And sadly, black-on-black violence or urban violence, whatever you want to call it, almost half the homicide deaths in America every year, and some years is even more than half, the victims are black. A lot of communities across this country are certainly frustrated by it. They have been traumatized by it. Some families have generations of members of their families who have been, sadly, the victims of this urban violence that has claimed the lives of too many family members. So one would ask the question, is there really hope? Is there really hope? Almost after 6 decades of urban violence, is there any real hope that this issue can truly be addressed, and the number of deaths that we are experiencing every year in large cities in particular across the country, is there any hope that it can be resolved? Now, I am a part of an organization that is a faith-based organization that focuses on ending the cycle of violence among young men of color between the ages of 12 and 24 years old. We have been on the ground in Indianapolis now for 24 years. We have certainly, over the 24 years, been in a lot of different hotspot areas across Indianapolis, but primarily we have focused, 10-Point has, on the west side of Indianapolis, particularly in the 46208 zip code, which is what was formerly known as the United Northwest area, Crown Hill, Highland Vicinity, Butler, Tarkington. We have spent time in the 46205 zip code, particularly in the Mapleton Fall Creek neighborhood. And now we're on the far east side, too, in an area from 38th Street to 42nd Street between Mid-Hoffer and German Church Road. And 10-Point has had a lot of success. We have had a lot of success, particularly, starting in 2016, which is what we are really known for, in 8 different hotspot areas. In 10-Point areas, we have seen between an 80 and 100% reduction in homicides or murders. And 19 times our neighborhoods that we're patrolling in partnership with IMPD and the community, we have seen a 100% reduction in violence. We are hours away in another neighborhood. We are days away in a second neighborhood from going another 365 days without a murder. Does it really work? Does it really work? Does what 10 Point does it really work? Can it be replicated to other neighborhoods? Or, as some people say, it doesn't really work. It may push the violence into another neighborhood, or Reverend Harris and them are messing with the numbers. Well, today I want to have a conversation with John Hall, who is the former deputy mayor of Indianapolis under Mayor Stephen Goldsmith. John Hall happened to be the deputy mayor of Indianapolis at the time that the Boston 10-point model was brought to Indianapolis. And Reverend Harrison and other pastors, Clarence Moore, Clarence Walden, Father Walden at Holy Angel Catholic Church, Pastor Clarence Moore at New Era Church, kind of were the pioneers that brought the 10-point model to Indianapolis. And we've certainly had our ups and downs. So, John, welcome to Real Talk today.
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you.
All right. Well, glad to have you back. And let's get into this conversation, because certainly I am a proponent of what I believe is a more of a bottom-up approach in helping to reduce the level of violence that we're seeing, in communities of color. I believe that you have to get the neighborhood involved, churches, community groups, community centers, and grassroots organizations have to be working together in a lot of different ways, because I don't believe there's one silver bullet, but certainly right. I am a component that the boots on the ground approach, which 10 Point does, is a key component to any violence reduction strategy that is going to be effective in an area of the city that is experiencing high levels of shootings, stabbings, murders, and even homicides. But there's been a lot of controversy with 10 Point. We have certainly had our critics, but I think when you look at the model and where the model has been implemented, it's really hard to argue with the numbers. Now, we can, have the debate, is it causation or correlation as to the effect of the work on the ground. But I certainly believe with IMPD and the work that they do, and the community that focuses on addressing root causes to the violence and trying to, mitigate some of the factors that are leading individuals down the wrong path, a life of crime and violence that tends to lead to, the shootings and stabbings and murders, that I believe the combination of all of those and the work that the city does, with its vast resources and certainly in helping address both the root causes and the immediate violence, that's where we've seen success in Indianapolis.
That's a good start. Let me give you just a snippet of a story that you may be able to build off of. Steve Goldsmith, an extraordinary bright guy and, really a high achiever, wanted me to go to Dayton, Ohio, because they were implementing cameras that they would put in hot spots around the city of Dayton, and they would use police, sheriff deputies to monitor those cameras 24/7 so that they could see when crime was being committed or while it's being committed. I thought it was a very interesting tool that maybe the city ought to take a strong look at. The cost factor was it. But I don't think there's any question that eyes and boots on the ground make a difference. as it has here in Indianapolis with our work with the 10-Point Coalition and other groups who may be trying to do similar sorts of strategies, and across the country. But I think the question might be, is the cost too high? Now, with the cameras, it was the man and woman power that was watching. But with you and the 10-Point, is it high risk for your troops to be out all times of days and nights in the midst of the areas where the hot spots are? You know, how much of a risk is that as you go and do this work? Because, yes, the eyes on the ground and boots on the ground does much more than cameras.
Right.
Much more.
Right.
Much more valuable.
Right.
But is the risk higher?
Well, it could be. It could be. And what I've learned over the 24 years is what reduces the level of risk, I believe, is having what we call OGs. It's a term that is used on the ground as a term of respect that the young people use to identify older individuals. Is also a gang term that was used to identify the original individuals who were a part of gang life in America, and certainly in certain major cities. What I feel that reduces the risk, if you have ex-offenders who operated in a particular area of the city that is quote unquote a hotspot area, that has street credibility, that once was a part of the problem. Many of them ended up getting arrested, convicted, and went to prison, came back out, turned their life around. But what they brought back was the knowledge of how the streets operate and the relationships on the street that I believe is key in maneuvering in what we call the underground economy. So that's that underground economy, the economy of crime and violence. If you have individuals that, for instance, work are from the 29th and MLK area or the Clifton area, then they will tend to know the drug dealers, the young people who may be a part of a clique or in a gang, or they will know their relatives, and the young people may know them because of their street cred that they once had, which makes it much easier, I think, to intermingle in that underground economy, and they know that you are there to help. They tend not to see you as a threat. I think when you combine that with pastors from that neighborhood who are known by the community, and those pastors and clergy and OGs are working together, I think it reduces the potential risk of being out there on the streets, interacting with a very dangerous group of individuals. And I think that's why 10-Point has had success. We tend not to bring individuals into a hotspot area that has no familiarity with the neighborhood and don't already have built-in relationships where, you know, the residents know them, you know. And I think for us, learning from Boston, because I think that was the key to the success that the Boston 10-Point had. You had clergy and OGs that were from the Dorchester area where the model was implemented, which did not take away all of the risk, but I think it certainly reduced the risk.
I can see that.
Yeah,
very good.
Yeah,
yes.
and I think that's one of the great lessons that 10-Point, Indy 10-Point has learned over our 24 years of being on the ground in Indianapolis, which I think has helped to our success. We believe, John, that there are really three, I think now four. It used to be three. I think four important components to violence reduction. There has to be an element of prevention, intervention, enforcement, and now a new category that I added, accountability. Because I think what's missing today is accountability, where individuals who have been arrested for violent crimes tend not to be held accountable anymore. And they tend to be released back into the areas in which they were arrested by law enforcement, either on home detention with ankle bracelets, or plea deals are made and they're back out on the street, not serving really a lot of time for the act that they committed. And then they tend to be either the suspect of another violent crime or they're the victim. And I think that sometimes the streets have a much harsher penalty for someone that they think has not been punished appropriately. And that can be death, and sometimes we see that, on the streets.
Right. And unfortunately, that impacts the urban community.
It does.
Which is the victim again.
Yes.
Of danger, crossfire, the violence that is created by this kind of lackadaisical system now, where people get to come back out, where you get 3 or 4 chances to do, to make amends or whatever. But it is impacting that urban area where elderly, children are trying to move up.
Right.
But the impact of violence keeps them in that same grind.
One of the things that I think we have learned is that the power of presence on the ground makes a difference. It's no different than the drug dealer who used to hang out on the street corner or the gang who occupied a block or area of the neighborhood. Their presence was normally intimidating to people. The drug dealer being on the street and people knowing who that individual was, and then him, sometimes providing or meeting a need and providing what a young person may need, allow that drug dealer to recruit an army or the gang. We operate 10-point in the reverse. We believe that our presence is an alternative to the underground economy and the criminal activity that gangs, cliques, and drug dealers are engaged in, where they're trying to influence young people to go in the wrong direction. When we're out there on the streets, I think we're not only a deterrent to criminal activity, but we're a presence there to provide a different kind of message to our most at-risk youth and young adults, to try to steer them to a pathway of success. And I think some of the criticism that we have heard as 10-point is that they don't do anything. I don't think people understand the power of presence, building relationships, and having conversations with our most at-risk youth and young adults, trying to keep Junebug alive. And that becomes the mission. How do we keep Junebug alive? How do we put him on a pathway of success? How do we get Junebug not to try to resolve his conflicts with violence? We believe the power of presence and building relationships on the street is an essential tool in accomplishing those goals.
There's no question that out of those you're touching on the ground, they have a chance to take another path.
Right.
And that's critical in preserving the neighborhood, keeping it peaceful, giving those that aren't in that underground economy a chance to move up.
Yeah, that's true. This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison. And my special guest today, for those who are just joining, is John Hall, the former deputy mayor of the city of Indianapolis under Mayor Steve Goldsmith. And we're having a conversation about the Indianapolis 10-Point Coalition, which is a faith-based organization that was launched in 1999 as one of the tools that the city was using to try to curb the epidemic of urban violence. We've been on the ground 24 years. I serve as the president of the board of directors of the Indianapolis 10-Point Coalition. And I am one who believes that that faith-based model that focuses on changing the heart and trying to put young people on a pathway of success and being a positive presence on the street works. I know everybody doesn't believe that, but I ask people to look at the numbers. In 2016, 10-Point launched an initiative in the Butler-Tarkington neighborhood, and for us, it became a new strategy. I say from 1999 to probably 2015, 10-Point focused mainly on using members of the 10-Point congregations, full-time OGs, and a few clergy. We really shifted to more part-time OGs and clergy and residents from that particular neighborhood we were patrolling. It was a change and a shift in strategy that what we were getting out of one individual that we were paying full-time, we could probably employ on a part-time basis or give a stipend to maybe 10 people with that same amount of money. So we tried to change the strategy to more part-time stipends, putting more people on the street, longer hours, and Butler-Tarkington became basically the project that we used to try to test it out. So it became kind of the pilot program that we tested out this new strategy in an area that was basically a 4-block radius from 38th to 42nd Street, from Illinois basically over to the cemetery, which is St. Clair, I think is the name of the street, to Crown Hill Cemetery. That was kind of the area. There had been a gang war involving 4 different gangs, and we tested the model in partnership with the Neighborhood Association, other community groups, and IMPD, and the Butler University Police Department to see if this new strategy would work in curbing the violence. And it did in a lot of different ways. We got residents to come forward and talk and provide information that was helpful to law enforcement, that led to 2 indictments of 2 of the gangs. We were able to help broker a truce between other gangs, and Butler-Tarkington ended up going 2.5 years without a homicide, and when they did have one, it was a domestic homicide. So we then moved it down to Crown Hill, and Crown Hill also went a year without a homicide in the same year that we used the model in Butler-Tarkington. So we had really 2 neighborhoods that saw a lot of success, with the boots on the ground approach, being on the ground 5 nights a week in those hotspot areas, and working closely with law enforcement and other community groups, which I call this bottom-up approach. And we saw a lot of success, John. We saw a lot of success. Then we replicated it in Highland vicinity. We replicated it in the United Northwest area. Then we kind of focused it around 29th and MLK because that seemed to be the area where we were having the most shootings, the most homicides. Then we took it to the east side because, there were those who were criticizing us just being on the west side. Could it work in what was one of the notorious hotspot areas in the city, 42nd and Post Road?
Right.
So in January of 2018, we got a grant, and we replicated the model 38th to 42nd Street between Post Road and Midhofer Road. And from June of 2018 to June of 2019, with all of those apartment complexes in there, the area went a year without a homicide. So what we had done on the west side, we were able to replicate it on the east side. So 19 times we have been successful in a 100% reduction in murders. I believe that this is a model that certainly could be used all over the city, and it doesn't necessarily have to be 10-point, but it's something that can be replicated. The North Shadeland Alliance replicated it at 75th and Shadeland. They had success. The Bean Creek Neighborhood Association replicated the public safety walk model. They have seen success down there. Both of those areas of the city went a year without a murder too. So I make the argument, John, that it can work, but it doesn't work by itself. It works in collaboration with what community groups are doing or grassroots organizations and the work that IMPD is doing. I think the combination of all of those things is what produces the success on the ground. And you're trying to reduce the frequency. So if you have 7 homicides one year, the goal the next year is to reduce that number. So if you reduce it from 7 to 5, that is reduction and success. And then the next year, you try to bring it down. So we try to measure it over a 3 to 5 year period of time. Good.
Because bringing violence down, I think, can really change a neighborhood.
Right.
And the individuals in the neighborhood. So I think the model has been successful in reducing the violence inside the neighborhoods you're patrolling. No question about it. I don't know, how do you see the 10-point coalition in being able to sort of change the lives of the individuals that you impact, that you're coming into contact with?
Well, I think that's where the partnerships lie with other groups that focus on different aspects of addressing root causes. So, if a young person is out of school and has been a dropout, then how do we get that person into a GED program? And there are groups that do that. If they're not skilled up, then there are programs in the city that we partner with to help them get the kind of training that's needed for them to go into the trades field, okay? And we're in conversation now, one of our 10-point board members with Ivy Tech, about providing, opportunities for ex-offenders and our most at-risk older youth or young adults. And then there are groups that provide job opportunities for those who are skilled up, who may have a criminal past, a felony against them, that will provide some opportunity. So I think that's what we try to do, is build these kind of partnerships where we are the Marines and we're on the ground, and we're in combat, but we don't do the direct services. It is our partners and groups that already have services that we are able to provide the kind of wraparound services that an individual may need. And with churches, they're certainly helpful too, in mentoring programs for at-risk youth and providing food, because in many of these hotspot areas, there are food deserts, and we certainly use the partnership with churches, if hunger is an issue, to provide meals for that particular family or individual. So it's those kind of collaborative relationships that we see are essential if you're going to reduce violence, because you're also attacking the root causes of it.
The private sector, are they open to your reaching out to them and getting help, getting Junior in a job? It seems like
they are.
Having
we are
success.
having success with that. The hurdle has always been those who have felonies against them. That's always been the hurdle. And some jobs require a certain number of years for them to have been out of prison. Some 7 years without getting in trouble. They tend to be open. Certain kind of felonies, particularly if you were convicted of robbery, that becomes challenging when it comes to certain kinds of jobs, because of what you got in trouble for in the past. And that's where we try to be an advocate for ex-offenders when it comes to the private sector and the public sector when it comes to job opportunities, because if we're not providing them with a job and we're trying to get them to put down the package and the gun, it becomes difficult for them to do that when they're trying to survive on the street. So then there is no alternative to what they're already doing on the street. So the business community plays an important role, I believe, in violence reduction, in providing opportunities for those individuals who are most likely to be the victim or the perpetrator of violent crimes, Which leads me to, John, a much larger question. I think a lot of communities or neighborhoods in communities of color have kind of thrown up their hands, about this whole issue of violence. And I'm not for sure they're convinced that anything can be done to end it. And I don't think Indianapolis is any different from any other major city in the country. I think there are areas of the city where people feel like it's hopeless, that nothing can really be done. Yeah. So what is your perspective on that?
Well, I think it's obvious that violence has just ripped urban core neighborhoods apart.
Right.
For at least 30 years, 40 years.
Right.
I think there are strategies that pinpoint, and that you bring out the word collaboration.
Right.
It's collaborations. So how do you get and turn around a young child that's being born into a community with very limited options? And it takes a much bigger game.
It does.
I mean, I think 10 Point does an excellent piece on bringing down the temperature in a neighborhood that has seen violence.
Right.
But when you go to address how do you change this whole atmosphere, this whole output of individuals who are lost, who have no choice, it's a much bigger game.
It is.
And I think that's where you've hit on pieces that I feel will work. And that is, you've got to begin to stop that revolving door and give more punishment to those who are committing a crime.
Right.
Now, that's not going to be something favorable in my neighborhood.
Right. That's true.
My road dogs and friends are not going to like that point.
Right.
But in order to curb that violence immediately, tomorrow, then you've got to have prosecutors that are interested in saving the neighborhood.
Right.
Not putting back into the neighborhood the reason for violence and crime, but protecting that neighborhood from violence and crime. For the long-term duration, I see that there's a much, just like Republicans voted this time on, are wanting to put more work requirements on welfare recipients.
Okay.
Individuals that are getting help from the welfare system.
Right.
I don't think they went far enough. I'm willing to go out there on the limb on that.
You're ready to go further than that, huh?
There needs to be accountability with assistance that individuals get. This isn't a black thing or a white thing or a red thing.
Right.
This is a thing.
Right.
That individuals who get assistance need to have milestones that they're meeting.
Right.
My child is in school. My child is reading by the second grade.
Right.
My child has all the shots.
Right.
That has to be a part of a program. And I don't know if that's a church thing that can be done, that churches around the country can get moms who are having these kids and bring them in and get that child going on a right trajectory to success? Or is it the government who can tighten up the welfare system to where you have to meet these milestones with your children, with yourself? You get educated or get skilled and your child is healthy and moving along an educational track, in order that when that child is 18, he's got options.
Right.
She's got options. Instead of the underground, they can go above the ground.
Yeah. You bring up a good point. I am seeing more young mothers, but most of them have gotten a little older when they're trying to skill themselves up. And we see this growing number that are in college. And I think that's part of what we see on the ground as 10 Point in trying to collaborate with groups that are also addressing what's going on at home. Because I'm dealing with Junebug on the street corner,
right?
A little Pookie. But what's missing is what's happening at home.
That's it.
And we also have to tackle what's happening at home. And that's why these collaborations are important, because there are other groups that are trying to focus on what's going on with mom and the other siblings at home that has created really an environment that has pushed Pookie into the streets rather than an environment that is encouraging Pookie to go down a pathway of success and trying to surround him, with the tools and the wraparound services to get him there. And I think you're absolutely right. We have to address that issue because, to be honest, John, it is in the most impoverished areas of the city where we see the greatest level of violence. And there is, between broken families and poverty, food deserts, all of those things are contributing to what we see, the rise in shootings, stabbings, and homicides.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
That whole piece of parenting,
right?
And then mom has the tools,
yes,
that she can use to parent, because mom may not know.
That's right. That's
she
true.
may not know
That's
the
true.
pathway to success.
That's right. That's true. That's
so
true.
Someone, if it's the church or if it's the government, has to provide these milestones so that if you want assistance, you can get assistance. But you gotta hit those milestones too.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's a combination of all. I think government. I think the church community. I think more grassroots organization. I think it's going to take all of us to try to address this very complex and multi-layer issue that has led to urban violence.
There's no easy solution.
No, there isn't.
It's been going on too long.
That's right.
But there, to take steps in order to turn it around,
right,
it's going to be a long journey.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I like what you said before we close, is that I do believe that 10 Point, in partnership with IMPD, helps to lower the temperature in the neighborhood. And I think that's what we do. And I know others may not believe that, or we're in not the toughest areas, but everywhere we have gone as Indy 10 Point, the area has seen an 80 to 100% reduction in murders. Those are just the facts.
And that's a good thing.
And that's a good thing. And it's not just because of us. I think it's because of what we bring to the table, what IMPD is doing, and what other community groups are doing in that neighborhood. The combination of all of those things, working in conjunction with each other, is what has led to the success. So, yes, I believe that 10 Point works. I believe that it does help lower the temperature in a neighborhood and bring the level of violence. I believe the model can work in any neighborhood in the country if you have the right leadership and the right people on the ground who know the community and who are able to connect with drug dealers, gangs, and cliques and provide them with an alternative to violence as a means of settling interpersonal conflicts.
I agree.
Amen. Amen. Well, John, thank you so much for joining me, today on Real Talk. Thank you also to the listeners for joining us today on Real Talk. I try to bring real talk about the real issues that affect our communities here in Indianapolis and across the country. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast and share it on Facebook and Twitter or other social media sites because we want to have a real conversation about the real issue. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I pray that you have a blessed and awesome day. This is Reverend Harrison.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast.
And be sure to check out other great podcasts on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Online now at allindianapodcast.com.